So here we are in Microsoft Flight Simulator at the default Manchester City Airport, aka Barton Aerodrome, that's Echo Golf Charlie Bravo, to look at Just Flight's latest offering for Microsoft Flight Simulator, which is this that you see before you, the Piper PA28 Turbo Arrow. In this case, the Turbo Arrow 4. In this package, you also get the Turbo Arrow 3. If you're not familiar with the differences between the 3 and the 4, the 3 had the tailplane mounted low down like a normal PA28, and the 4 had the T-tail with the tailplane mounted up high. And it does have a bearing on how this flies. This thing with the T-tail, which is why I'm using it for this review, does have different flight characteristics from a normal PA28. A little bit more challenging to fly, as we will see. So you can see it's a very nice model of a PA28. I've got all the little extras showing at the moment. So I've got the tow bar attached to the nose gear. We've got the chocks in place. We've got the tie downs. We've got the oil door open, passenger door is open, and cargo door is open. And if I go onto the drone view, which I've moved in close, you can see that the detail's very nice. You've got mud thrown up from the gear on the texturing and mud on the underneath of the side of the underside, and smoke and dirt from the exhaust and what have you. Very nice texturing on the tires, nice texturing on the undercarriage, good detail on the texturing. You have to come in really close to be able to sort of pick up the pixels of the thing. And if I move that view up a little bit and then tilt it down, we can see good detailing on the wing, nice texturing for the fuel tanks and the stenciling and all that kind of stuff, and very nice sort of reflective textures, as we can see. So this thing is really, really lovely as an exterior model, and it stands up very well to the real thing when you compare it to that. And the same continues when you get inside the thing, where it looks very nice. And this will be a cockpit that's very familiar to people who've had Just Flight PA28s over the years. And all of this stuff functions, and I do mean all of this stuff. As we will see in this review, there are some interesting things that work on it. Now, those of you familiar with not just Flight add-on aeroplanes, but a lot of add-on aeroplanes, Carinado do it as well, Aerosoft did it as well, and that's putting an iPad in the cockpit to be able to control exterior animations and things like that. And this is no exception. However, there is a difference on this iPad to what other people do, and that is that this thing has a lot more functions on it than your typical Carinado one. Now, you can turn the iPad on and off with the little button at the side, or you can hide it with that little hidden switch there. So we can see, I'll start on the right hand side, you can see all of these things lit up in green for the chocks, the tie downs, the tow bar, the cabin door, the baggage door, and the oil door, which you can just about see closed on the engine cowling there. If you don't want to use those for the things that you could use for real, you can see that what we've got is we can unlatch the door like you do in real life on a PA28, so you can taxi the thing with the door latched open if things are getting a bit warm. And down there on the door handle, you've got that thing. So if you want to open the door using the normal door handles, you can. Now, to the left of that, we can see aircraft options. We've got auto fuel selector. Now, what that's referring to is on a real PA28, the fuel tank is off at the moment. And if I turn the cot to point there, we're on the left tank. And if I turn it there, we're on the right tank. Now, what that means is that as you fly a PA28 along, what you have to do is you have to have it on the right tank. And then what you can do is you can have it on the, after you've been flying along a while, you can put it on the left tank and use a bit of fuel out of that. And then you can put it back on the right tank, so you end up using a bit of fuel out of one tank, then a bit of fuel out of the other tank, and so on and so forth, so you keep the thing nicely in balance. If you don't want to do that, you can have auto fuel selector, and that will help you out with it. In common with a lot of Just Flight GA aeroplanes, you've got a lot of options with regard to the avionics. So you can see there GPS dual, where we've got a GNS 430 and a GNS 530. I can swap that out, so we can just have the 530 and more traditional radios. Or if I give it a hit again, we can have more traditional radios there, and we can have a GPS 100 if you want to go a bit old school. So you've got some avionics options on there. Not only that, you can save the state for the cockpit, and then there is another avionics option there. You can see HSI, horizontal situation indicator enabled. That's that thing there, and we can change that and go to DI, like that, direction indicator, and that'll put us with that thing there. I prefer the other one because a little bit more information on this thing if you're using sort of ADF stuff, which I do tend to do. Now, carrying on back with this thing here, we can hide the left yoke, hide the right yoke, or if you prefer, like you can with most airplanes, you can click on it to show and hide them. So you've got choices. Directly below these two columns that we've just looked at, you got flight info, tailwind, crosswind, what your true airspeed, whether you're on track, and a bit more information about fuel used and economy and stuff like that, and your altitude and what have you. So lots of good flight information on there. Some of that you can get from the GPS, of course, but nice to be able to have it on there. And then in the final column on the left-hand side, we've got aircraft states. 3 preset states, ready for takeoff, ready for start, and cold and dark. But, you can go anywhere in between them and save a state if you prefer. And then what we've got is we've got maintenance, where you can fill the oil and recharge the battery if that's gone flat. And you'll notice it's giving me a warning there saying prime fuel flow required. And then you can see that is enabled on there with that little tick box. You can disable that if you want to. So if you don't want it simulating the requirement for maintenance, you can turn that off if you want. And if I click on this maintenance thing here, you can see engine damage and an option to repair the engine. Again, you would have to have that little tick enabled for it to do that. And it is possible to damage the engine on this thing and like run the battery down and things like that. And then last but not least, we've got a co-pilot that you can enable or disable on the external view. So if I enable that, we go there and we can see that we've got a co-pilot in the passenger seat. We've got no pilot in the cockpit at the moment because I haven't started the engine. The pilot appears when you start cranking everything up. So loads of fun stuff on there, and you can show and hide it with that thing. So let's have a look at what goes on in this. As I say, pretty much everything works in this cockpit. In fact, I'd go so far as to say literally everything works in this cockpit. So let's have a look at that. So that includes trivial things like the sun visor, although that does actually work in blocking the sun a little bit if you've got things like ambient occlusion on and what have you. And the only thing that doesn't simulate is what happens in the real aeroplane, which is if you smack your head on the edge of that, it's really sharp, and you'll end up with a line on your forehead. Outside air temperature gauge, which works and is useful, particularly for this thing because it is not cleared for flying into known icing conditions. However, I discovered a little bit of an interesting thing with this. Whiskey compass works, so more on icing and how to deal with it in a moment. Now, down on this side, we've got an emergency location transmitter switch. In most Just Flight stuff, what that does is that sort of resets everything if you've got like a hydraulic lock and stuff like that. I must admit, I haven't looked in the manuals to see if it does anything in this thing, but that's normally what it does. We've got a DV panel on there. You have to unlatch it and then click on it to open the thing. And then, it's a bit laggy that. Obviously the sim's freaking out a bit. And then we can latch the thing as well. I'm not quite sure why that's lagging there. It's normally a bit smoother, that animation. And then in the cockpit, if we move the view slightly over to the side, you can see we've got a trim wheel there. If you've got an exterior hardware trim wheel from Logitech and Saytech, the one that comes on the with the autopilot controls and stuff like that, I've checked it because I use one of them in my flight simulators, and the Logitech Saytech exterior autopilot does actually work, the one with the trim wheel, so you can use that. Or of course you can manually do it with the mouse wheel if you want to, so you can put a bit of nose up trim if you want. More on that when we get flying the thing. Don't put too much up trim on it. We'll see why when we do the takeoff. You've got the emergency blowdown system for the landing gear. So if your gear's up and you've lost all power and what have you, you can use that thing to bring the gear down. And if you don't have that selected, you push it forward twice and that arms the system. If you don't have that down, you get a little warning light under the gear, and we'll see that light up when we start the thing up. So fuel selector, which we've already seen on the left-hand side, and then let's have a look at what's on the panel. Well, as I say, all of this stuff works, including the chronometer on there. Now, if I get the yoke out of the way, and I'll get the other yoke out of the way so that we can have a look at these things. As I say, the Logitech Saytech autopilot works if you've got one of them, or alternatively, you can use these controls for the autopilot. Because this thing models engine damage, you're going to have to, if you've got that option turned on, be very careful to monitor the manifold pressure gauge and the RPM gauge on there. And another thing you'll have to monitor is the overboost light, which we'll see light up when we start it. It's that thing where I'm waving my mouse around. At the moment, we've got gear lever, mixture, prop pitch, and throttle controls there. Rudder trim there. There's an alternate air switch there. There is a switch there for releasing the parking brake. When you release the parking brake, notice the pedals don't move. I'm pretty sure the pedals do actually move on a PA28 when when you release the parking brake, because I think it's linked to the toe brake system. But if I'm wrong about that, then apologies. But perhaps someone who's flown a PA28 recently might be able to put that in the comments and say whether that's true or not. It's a long time since I've been in a PA28, but I seem to remember the pedals moving when you release that parking brake. So we've got all the arm meters there and all that kind of stuff. Obviously, there is the starter switches there for the magnetos and what have you, and then we've got a typical 6-pack on there with a few additional gauges, such as a vacuum pump and stuff like that. And then you've got all these warning lights and test lights and the fuel primer switch there, and all of that stuff works. And as it warned us on that iPad, we are going to have to prime this to start it. Then what you've got is you've got all the electrical stuff, including the avionics. So let's have a look at this. Battery switch is there, and you'll notice that when I put the battery switch on, some of the electrical stuff starts coming alive. That becomes more apparent if you do this. So we'll put the twin GPS panels on there, the 430 and the 530. So those things come on when you turn the battery switch on, but it doesn't turn all of the avionics on. Notice the ammeter needle moves. And then what we've got is we've got the alternator on there. And then you've got other electrical switches like the landing lights and the pitot heat and all that kind of stuff like that, that you can turn on or off. Now, those switches don't turn on all the avionics, so note that you will need to turn on the transponder with the little volume knob thing there. It's not actually the volume knob, but works like one. And the same is true of the ADF. You need to turn that on, and I would do that anyway because I put it on beat frequency oscillation, because that's kind of the useful way to deal with it. And then you got the little switch for this thing here, which is giving you your sort of autopilot information and what have you. So not all of the switches go on with the electrical there, and so some of them you need to turn switches to do that. Now then, all of these circuit breakers work, and if we have a look at that, I will demonstrate that to you. So we've got autopilot, energy setup, blah 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 blah, pitot heat, start and what have you, pitch trim, stall warning and what have you, instrument panel, boom, pop the circuit breaker, and sure enough, everything goes off. That's everything that was linked to that system there, but not that one, because that's on an alternate wiring system like that. So pretty damn realistic. But it gets better. Now, the PA28, either the normal version or the PA28 Turbo Arrow, is not certified for flying into known icing conditions. So you do not see de-icing boots on the wings, nor do you see de-icing boots up on the tailplane and on the tail fin. And you don't have a heated propeller, and you don't have any sort of heating system on the windscreen. Now, that might lead you to think that any ice that appears on the thing is going to be obscuring your view. Not true. I was curious to see whether a trick that you can do in real world actually works on this, and it turns out it does. If you've got the engine running and you open both cabin heaters all the way and then put the fan on high, which you should hear kicking in there, what that does is it simulates warming the air in the cabin. And because it warms the air in the cabin, it warms the windscreen. And when I was testing this thing out yesterday and took it up to 20,000 feet, I was getting crystals of ice appearing on the windscreen, and I thought, I wonder if you can do that trick in the sim as well. So I put both of those sliders over, put it on high, and sure enough, it cleared the windscreen. I am not sure whether it would clear serious ice off the windscreen, but it certainly cleared a little bit off there. So, not certified for flying into icing conditions, but there is that little trick that you can do with the thing. So all of those avionics work on the thing, which is kind of nice. So we're about ready to get this thing started up. Now, I have the engine sound turned down in the cockpit in my flight simulator settings. So you won't hear the engine being very loud. That's my settings that are turned down. But what I will do is I'll put it on the external view and rev the engine so that you can hear that. So what we need to do is we need to get the mixture fully forward like that, and we need to get the prop fully forward, or at least partially forward, in order to start this thing. There we go, like that. And I don't think I wanted to be changing that. I'm going to crack the throttle open a little bit like that. I'm going to hit this to prime it with some fuel, which you might hear, and then we should be able to start that. I didn't prime it for very long, but hopefully that will start the thing, and sure enough it does. Now, the Turbo Arrow has it's a Continental 360 engine with a turbocharger system on it. That is a horizontally opposed flat 6 engine, 6 cylinders. The normal PA28 has a Lycoming 360, which is a 4-cylinder engine, so that's a flat 4 horizontally opposed, so they sound a little bit different from one another, and you will be pleased to know that this thing does sound like the Continental flat 6. They haven't just used the same engine noise, or at least it sounds like that to me anyway. So if we go on the external view, you can hear the engine, and what I will do is I will rev that up a little bit for you. Now, another thing you will have noticed from that is that it didn't move when I revved it up. Now, this thing came out a couple of days ago. Initially, when it came out, it did creep forward a little bit, even when you held it on the brakes. But today, as I'm doing this review, a couple of days after this thing came out, they released a tiny patch which tweaked a few things. It tweaked the engine modeling a little bit, but what it also tweaked is the ability for the brakes to hold so that you could do a proper engine test. So you can do a proper engine run-up test on this thing, which is kind of nice, and that's what I was doing there. And as you heard, the engine sounds are very good. Now, since I don't need to get to any of this stuff, I will put the yoke back on like that. But one thing that you didn't see, so you'll notice that we've got a chronograph on there, and you'll notice that light blinking now, which is warning me that that gear blowdown system isn't enabled. But one thing that you did not notice because you were on the external view, which I will give you now, is this: full throttle, and you'll see that the overboost warning light on the panel is lighting up. And if I kept doing that and kept it running for long enough, what that would do is that would start kicking in some engine damage. So what you have to be aware of with this thing, because if you select the engine damage modeling, is not taking the RPM into the red for too much and not boosting past about 40 inches of manifold pressure on that gauge there. So if you like all that engine modeling stuff, watch those gauges. Now, that is the thing that the turbo actually does on the PA28 turbo arrows. It will allow you to run 40 inches of manifold pressure even when you get up high. So as you climb past 10,000 feet in a typical non-turbo arrow, the air's starting to get thinner, you have to start leaning off the fuel and what have you, but there's only so much air that you can get into the engine, so the manifold pressure starts dropping on it, and eventually when you get to about 15,000 feet in a normal Piper arrow, it won't climb anymore. Some of that's to do with how much lift the wings can develop as well, but a lot of it's to do with how much power the engine can put out. Whereas on a turbo arrow, because it's got a turbocharger on it, that forces air into the engine even when you get above 10,000 feet, and so you can run 40 inches of manifold pressure, or up to 40 inches of manifold pressure. I wouldn't go past that. You'll be overboosting the engine all the way up to 20,000 feet. So this thing will go about 5,000 feet higher than a normal PA28 with a non-turbo engine. And not only that, it'll climb at a really, really fast rate all the way up to that altitude. You might, on a good day, be able to get it past 20,000 feet. So you can probably get this thing up to 20,000 feet at a climb rate of about 800 feet a minute. Try that in a non-turbo PA28 and you're going to be very disappointed. It'll top out at about 15,000 feet. But the other thing to bear in mind with a turbocharged engine in an aeroplane like this is that because the turbocharger is forcing air into the engine all the time, it's not something that you turn on or off. It gets a very efficient fuel-air mixture even at low level. So it's a little bit faster low down as well, to the extent that you don't even need to use full throttle for this thing to take off, because if you do use full throttle, you'll see that I was overboosting the engine. Now, you can overboost the engine for a little while without getting any damage, so that means that you can get this thing in and out of quite small airfields, and if it's hot and high, it's got a little bit more power. But when you get up high and you're in the cruise, this thing will cruise at about 170 knots, which is about 30 to 40 knots faster than a normal non-turbo PA28 would cruise at. So this thing is a lot faster and it can fly higher, so you've got the choice of going over some bad weather, and you can pick an altitude where you've got a suitable tailwind and all that kind of stuff. So this thing is a lot more flexible than the normally aspirated PA28. That's the differences. So you might think, well, why would I even bother getting the non-turbo arrow from Just Flight. Why wouldn't I just go and buy this? Well, they're both interesting aeroplanes. They've got their quirks and what have you, and you can get both of them for the price of pretty much a similar price to say an equivalent Carinado plane and what have you. So pretty good value. Yeah, of course, it's a bit different in the real world. In the real world, if you were walking around an airfield kicking tires and considering buying an aeroplane, you would have to consider that the turbo arrows are more expensive to maintain because you've got more moving parts, you've got the turbo to maintain and what have you. So they're not always as popular as you think they might be. And another thing that makes them not quite as popular is that T-tail on some of the turbo arrows, not all of them. There are some turbo arrows out there with a low-mounted tail plane. They're the Turbo Arrow 3s, but some people don't like the high-mounted tail plane because of the different landing and takeoff characteristics that it gives it. When we go for a little circuit in a minute, I'll demonstrate why that is the case and something that you have to be aware of with it. Now, notice that if I give it a little bit of engine power, the DV panel, things do, see, there you go, it's sorted out the animation on that, not choppy like it was before. Things get louder when you open the DV panel, but another thing worth noting is that you can open the DV panel in flight. If you've got damage on in your sim, it won't cause the thing to crash, which is kind of cool. One last thing to look at before we go for a little bit of a flight, and that is the night lighting on the thing. So up in the ceiling, you've got this thing, which is the floodlight, and I'm going to put that on full throttle. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to, you can see a little bit of red light on there, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to change the time of day in the sim so that you can see what that looks like. So there you go, there's the overhead floodlight shining down on things. But what we've also got, if I pull the prop lever back a bit, we've got this thing here. So we can get that thing on. You'll notice if you look at the lettering on the transponder, can you see those that 7000 lighting up a little bit? And there are a few other bits and bats that will be doing that. So that's what that thing does. If I see if I can, there we go. So it's mostly the avionics that's affecting. This is lighting up all the dials on the thing. So you can do that, and then what you can do is you can back this off if you want. And just have that kind of lighting going on. And if you turn off all the lighting, what it does is it kicks in the flashlight and what have you. So lots of, if you like flying your planes at night, lots of options for lighting, and it looks pretty good like that. What I will do is I'll turn those things off. Not that it really matters. That's just kind of my habit, really, of not leaving lights on planes because the bulbs burn out. So there we go. That's all of that stuff. Which means that we're about ready to fly. I'm going to put the yoke back on. Now then, I've got my Saytech rudder pedals at the moment, so if you hear some clattering, that's my feet, my knees sort of banging into my computer desk, because this computer desk hasn't got a lot of room underneath it, but I'm using my Saytech pedals. So we'll release the parking brake. And as I say, that's probably about my only gripe about it, is I'm pretty sure the pedals move a little bit on the real thing when you release the parking brake. But if that's the worst thing that I could say about it, then that's pretty good, really. Oh, night lighting as well. Since I've got all the lights on, I'll do that same thing on there. And we can see that you've got very good strobes on this thing, which is one of those sort of little bugbears of mine. Now you'll notice, can you see that we've got no nav lights on this thing? Now what that is if I use the L key to put the lights on this thing, they came on. And now what that actually was if I go in the cockpit and I'll take it off nighttime, what that actually was the intensity of the lights adjusted by those controls there. So this thing's got really good strobe lights on it, which is cool. So you can cheat by doing the lights with the L key if you want, and you'll notice that those things are switching there like that. Notice that if we come down here, I'm accidentally putting the autopilot on there. If we come down here, notice that when I do that, can you see that the electrical system is detecting the fact that I've got stuff on. So, you know, nice detailing on this with the engine modeling and stuff like that. So anyway, let's take this thing out for a bit of a drive. So I'll get it on a decent view like that on the external. And we'll taxi the thing out. Now, as noted, this thing has a lot of power. So what I will do is I will take off without full power to demonstrate just how much power this thing has got with its turbo. So it's not just about high altitude stuff. This thing is a little bit more fast and a little bit more powerful at lower altitudes as well. Now, just looking over at the windsock there, doesn't look like we've got much wind at all. So we don't really need to worry about taking that into account. And it does handle well on the ground. There you go, I'm giving it full rudder kicks on there. Just go into the cockpit for this bit so that I can turn the thing accurately, and we can line it up on runway 26 at Barton. There we go. Now, as noted, if you overboost the engine, you get that little warning light appearing on the dashboard, that thing there, warning that you've overboosted. You can get away with doing it for a little while, so you could use it for takeoff without worrying too much about damaging the engine. But what I'm going to do here is you can get the throttle up to about 86% without overboosting it, and I'll demonstrate that this thing can take off without full throttle, and I'll keep the view like that so that you can see the rudder inputs that I need to make to keep this thing straight. It doesn't really require a huge amount of rudder input to keep it straight, but there is a little bit required. So here we go. I'm going to hold it on the brakes, and then I'm going to bring the power in. And there's the overboost on there, and I've backed it off. And if I just swap, because there you can see I've got the throttle on 88% and I'm not hitting overboost on there, and I'm going to keep it on this view so that you can see the rudder inputs. And you know, ordinarily if I was taking off, what I would typically be doing is giving it some flaps. So I will give it a little bit of flaps, but we could probably get away with taking off without flaps. But I've got one stage of flaps on there. I am not on full throttle, and I'm releasing the brakes, and off we go. And I've got to sort of give it a little bit of rudder to keep it straight, but there's no crosswind on here. I think the real thing might actually require a bit more rudder to keep it going straight, but not a desperately bad amount. And you can see it picks up speed very well, and I'm just easing the thing into the air. Now, this is something to be aware of. I'll just go on the external view so that you can see the gear coming up. So up goes the gear, like that. And because this thing will be accelerating quite quickly, I'm going to get the flaps up as well, because I don't want to be exceeding the flap speed on the thing. Now, something to be aware of on this, I'm going to bring the throttle back a little bit because this thing climbs like a homesick angel. Now, something to be aware of with this is if you put a lot of nose-up trim on this thing, because it's got a T-tail, there's not much blocking the airflow to the T-tail when you're on the ground. And so if you put too much pitch up, what it can do is that can throw the thing into the air before it's reached flying speed, because of where the tail is sitting. Oh, and a little bit of lag from the sim there. That is the sim, not this thing. It runs very smoothly. So, you know, don't put too much nose-up trim on this thing on a takeoff. Otherwise, you're going to find the thing trying to leap into the air, and immediately sort of sounding the stall warning. So that's one thing with the T-tail to be aware of. Another thing to be aware of is that when you bring it in for a landing, because you've got a high angle of attack, the wings can block the airflow to the T-tail. So be very careful about what trim you've got on the thing when you're bringing it in for a landing, because you want every bit of elevator authority you can get on this thing for flaring it, and that is modeled in the sim. So if you've got the thing so it's wanting to pitch up a little bit, that's not necessarily a bad thing when you're coming in for a landing. Now here we are on the downwind, and just off the wing there, disappearing behind it, you can see you can see Barton Aerodrome. And if you're curious about this scenery, this is not the default scenery for Manchester. If you go to flightsim.to and type in Manchester, you'll find this scenery. It's photogrammetry for the Manchester area and the surroundings and stuff like that, and it's free. So if you're looking at this and thinking, hang on, I went to Barton Aerodrome and flew my plane and the scenery didn't look like that, download that freebie and it will do. And it's great, as we'll see, because at the moment, if I change the view, we've got all of Manchester city centre, and I'm currently that building that you can see behind me with the green roofs is the Trafford Centre, which is a huge shopping centre next to the motorway, which gets tons of traffic jams around it. There's a ski slope centre where you can do indoor skydiving. But what's really important for Barton is this thing here that I'm pointing out, which is the AJ Bell Stadium alongside Barton Bridge near the river. And that is a really good, with its red stands, is a really good visual indicator for picking up where Barton Aerodrome is, because it can disappear into the terrain a little bit, particularly there where you can see there's a cloud shadow on the thing. So that's another reason to try downloading that scenery, because it's free and it'll help you out a bit if you like that. And you've got things like, you know, Manchester United and Manchester City Centre and all that kind of stuff on there as well. So kind of cool. Now, one of the things to watch out for with this thing is, because it is so very highly powered, you'll notice that if you're not paying attention, you can find yourself at 2,800 feet before you know it. So you really have to be a little bit cautious with this thing with regard to, you know, backing off the throttle. But of course, that means that this thing's great for climbing up to cruise altitudes. And like I say, it will go all the way up to 20,000 feet, probably maintaining about 800 feet per minute without too much of a nose pitch up angle. And is really good for that. So if you're looking for a very capable sort of GA tourer, then this is pretty nice. So anyway, I'm going to turn this thing around, and I'm going to come off the throttle a lot so we start descending, because otherwise we're never going to get into the airfield. And I'll get some flaps down just to sort of brake us, and I'll put the gear down as well. That's the warning set beeping that we're getting there, is I've closed the throttle without the gear being down, but the gear is now down and locked. I can check that with the green lights on the panel, but obviously in Flight Simulator we can also cheat and look there like that and see that we have got the gear down. So there we are, turning around and heading back. You see what I mean about, you know, the kind of scenery disappearing and it being difficult to pick up airfields and stuff like that, and why it's useful to have all this scenery on there. Of course, we can always cheat in Microsoft Flight Simulator. We can come up here and we can go on the VFR map and we can go, right, well, where the hell's Barton? And if we zoom out a little bit, we can see there it is. So we've got EGCB there. So what I can do is I can just sort of cheat and turn around and head for Barton Aerodrome on there. But as I say, you know, if you want to do it all visually, then this scenery is worth having. If you want to fly over the UK, that is. For those of you that are really interested in the PA28, Just Flight have got another one coming out soon. They've already done the normal PA28 Arrow, which was released a few weeks ago. They've just released this, which is the Turbo Arrow 3 and 4, but they're also doing the Warrior, PA28 Warrior. Now, the PA28 Warrior is the fixed gear kind of bottom of the range PA28, but you know, you might be tempted to think, well, you know, why am I going to want that? You know, it's a bit slower, you know, and can't climb as high. Well, that's true, but with it not having a retractable gear, so you can see there we've got Barton in sight now. With it not having a retractable gear, it's got more room in the wing, so the Warrior, I'm pretty sure, has got slightly larger fuel tanks in the thing, and it's a good fun aeroplane. And you're more likely to, you know, if you go to flying clubs, you're more likely to fly a Warrior or a Dakota or a Cherokee than you are an Arrow. So the Piper Arrows and Turbo Arrows tend to be sort of like individual owners or you know, groups that buy an aeroplane and what have you. So yeah, look out for that. The one bizarre one that I'm kind of hoping that they do is there was a Cherokee with floats. I'm hoping they'll do that version of it. And there's another even more bizarre one, which is the Turbo Dakota. That's the fixed gear PA28 that is also a turbo. You know, I'd love it if they made one of them. That'd be fantastic, because it's a bit anachronous to have fixed gear and a turbo, but Piper did indeed make one. So there we go. We're flying along the river there, and we've got that red stand on the A.J. Bell Stadium that we can see, and just to the right of that you can see the 26 right and 26 left on Barton Aerodrome. Now, keep in mind what I was saying about this thing. It can run out of elevator authority when you flare it, because the wings block the airflow to the tail, which can make things a little bit interesting with this thing. So there are a couple of things to bear in mind with a Turbo Arrow with a T-tail. Don't be too late on the flare. That's one. And don't come in too slow, because if you're too slow, you won't have enough elevator authority. Now, so, you know, coming in at sort of just above stall speed with this thing, you'll end up arriving rather than landing. So you might want to come in a little bit faster than in a normal PA28, just so you've got a little bit of elevator authority. You don't have to do that, but what you definitely don't want to do is you don't want to flare too late with this thing, because if you're coming in steep and you flare too late, it's going to be entertaining, let's put it that way. So there we are, pretty much lined up for 26 right. Have another look at this thing in the air. So the gear's down and everything, and we're all looking good. And there we are, passing over Barton Bridge, which isn't particularly well modelled. It's a much more impressive structure in real life. It's got kind of like a humpback look to it and what have you, but you know, it's reasonably close. There's a few less trees in that field to the left as well than there are in the sim, but it looks pretty close. So you can see that I'm not being slapdash about the approach here. I'm making sure that I've got plenty of nose pitch up early, so that this thing's coming in quite nose high. There we go. So slightly, so that was okay. That, you know, it wasn't, you know, an exactly textbook landing, but I didn't smack it down really, really hard. So that's one of the interesting things about this, because you get the T-tail version. It's something that you might have to practice a little bit with landing and taking off with. But you know, if you don't want to do that, you just want a turbo PA28. You also get the Arrow Turbo Arrow 3, which doesn't have any of that business going on. Oh, a bit too much brakes on there. So you don't have to worry about that. But if you like a bit of a challenge with your flying, then that's kind of fun. So I guess it comes down to do I or do I not recommend this? And the answer is yes, I do recommend it. Out of this and the normal PA28, you're probably going to find this one's a little bit more flexible. And of course, you get the T-tail and the normal tail on it and all this kind of stuff. But as I say, you qualify for one for 10 quid if you buy the other one. And you might even qualify for a discount on the first one that you buy. And you'll certainly qualify for a discount on that Warrior. With having bought one as well. So you can get yourself a nice collection of PA28s for not much money. And right now, this is, you know, about as good a GA aeroplane as you can get for Microsoft Flight Simulator, because it does all that engine damage modeling, and it's got a very, very sophisticated flight model. It's got great texturing. It's a really nice model. It's got lots of good avionics options on it and all that kind of stuff. There's loads of reasons to get this, and of course it's from Just Flight, who support is always very good for them. And I make no bones about this. It's a British company as well. Because I'm from Blighty, I've always supported them a little bit, but not without some justification, because they make some great stuff. So anyway, there's a link in the description for this thing, if you want to check it out. And as I say, I did a review of the first one that they did for Microsoft Flight Simulator, which was the normal PA28, and I dare say I'll do a review of their PA28 Warrior, the fixed gear one, when they bring that out. And I'm hoping, against hope, that they will also do a Cherokee with floats on it. I'd really like to see one of them from Just Flight, because that would be really good. So that is it for the Just Flight PA28 Turbo Arrow 3 and 4 for Microsoft Flight Simulator. But it's not all from me today. I'm uploading this one, and then I'm straight on to another review of another interesting aeroplane. So check that one out. And if you don't want to miss that, you know the thing to do. Click that subscribe button on my channel. I love it when people subscribe to my channel, because one, it lets me know that you like the stuff that I do. Two, it lets you know when I upload a new video, and I also like all the comments that you put in under the videos, and I do always respond to them as well. And usually I respond to them pretty quickly. But if you don't want to do that, check me out on the AvSim and Flight Sim forums and the Microsoft Flight Simulator forums and all that kind of stuff. And yeah, it's great fun to chat to people with all that. So I'll shut up. Anyway, there you go. Piper PA28 Turbo Arrow from Just Flight. $29.99 in pounds sterling, but with a lot of discounts available for it and their loyalty point scheme and stuff like that. So the chances are you're probably not going to pay that for it if you've ever had anything from Just Flight before. And even if you do end up paying full price for the thing, is it worth it? Absolutely, go for it. Anyway, that's all from me. Cheery bye from Chock's Hangar, but look out for that other video later today. Interesting and slightly weird plane. But for now, bye!